For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Good evening. Welcome to today's Entrepreneur, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with FL Montreal's Josh Miller. Good evening, Josh.
Hello, Dan.
And nice to be back on today's Entrepreneur.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back. And this evening, we're going to chat with Sandra Reisch. She is with the Montreal Centre for Anxiety and Depression, and a very interesting business. And later in the program, we'll bring in HR specialist Micheline Maillet on the mental health challenges in the workplace and how people like Sandra can help.
There, today it's certainly, I don't know if it's more prevalent, but I think there's more awareness around it, and I think employers really need to face or be ready for it and be ready to handle it head on. So we're going to chat about that later in the program. For
sure. We'll talk about the Bell Let's Talk campaign, I'm assuming as well, which has helped advance that conversation. So how all of this impacts the workplace and Sandra as an entrepreneur on the program this evening. First, we'll get to some news and notes in a second, but as usual, our entrepreneurial question of the week, and myself as a fairly new entrepreneur, so I like to once in a while bring up issues that I think people can be interested about. And this one, I guess, is more unique to me, but it's something that I have been curious about for a while, and that is politics. So I have these two sides of me, right? It's on the business side where I'm not political at all, and then the stuff I do in CJD and all the political stuff. And I've noticed that once in a while I'll go into a pitch meeting and someone will say, I didn't like your opinion when you said that thing a while ago. And sometimes I just don't know how to handle that. And it comes from both the left and right. Do you notice that the business community in Montreal tends to be more right-wing, or is it kind of evenly distributed? And is that something to watch out for if you're an entrepreneur who's also political?
It really comes down to right wing, left wing, and I think there's so many people that are in the middle or don't even understand what right and left are. And every day could be a different wing.
I'm among them, by the way.
And listen, I have my left and right and middle moments as well. Probably most people do. Business people, entrepreneurs want to do business with people that they can associate with people that fit with their character. So if you happen to be on the left on a day where your customers on the right, you might not continue that conversation. Yeah. However, if you happen to be both in the middle or both on the right or both on the left on any given day, well then they're going to like what you have to say. They're going to be on the same page as you. They're going to want to do business with you. It's almost as if, and I've had many conversations with clients where, we have common hobbies, or, we both like to do the same things, whether it's travel or gamble, I shouldn't say that on air too late, or what have you. And when you find that connection, you're really, it almost doesn't matter right, left, or other. You find that aspect. If you happen to be politically on the same page, well, maybe all the better. I can't tell you how many conversations. First of all, I stay away from Trump conversations because you just never know. You never know with business people what they're going to react or how they're going to react, because a lot of them, say, well, the man is crazy. But you have a lot of business people that say, well, he's bringing down taxes.
Yeah, my stock portfolio is doing pretty well. So.
Exactly. So I really try and avoid that because I have my own opinions and don't want to piss anybody off. That said, it's really about characters, really about fit, left, right, or otherwise. And people change their socks. People change their left and right, like they change their socks sometimes.
I'll keep sitting on the fence for now. Thank you, Josh. Some entrepreneurial news and notes now. Juliette et Chocolat has been a local chain for a while, and they are expanding in a big way.
They have been around 15 years now. I believe they opened in 2003. And, for them, the location, like all or most retailers, they have 8 locations. They have their manufacturing hub in the South Shore. And they've received, based on the article, they get calls all the time to franchise. They weren't ready. So some of it, and then now apparently they're ready. But they're ready to the point of now they'll consider it. And it's all about location. They're going to go into Ontario, outside of Quebec, and they're going to look at locations. So really the moral of the story, the moral of this article is, where do you want to expand to, and can you control the location? If you are so good at figuring out locations, because since 2003, Juliette and Chocolat, that have opened up 8 locations, have not closed a single location. they've remained in their locations and operated. So they seem to understand that location concept pretty well. They're going to apply that to other areas across Canada, starting in Ontario, and it's going to take time. And as per the article, they know it'll take time and they're not rushing into it. They just want the right place in the right area. Now, what it doesn't talk about is how to actually find that franchisee and make sure it's the right fit and connection, and that they'll really carry and promote your brand the way they have to. That's a whole other aspect that's, I would say, even harder than finding a location.
Well, good luck to them. I know Torontonians love their desserts, so I'm sure they'll do very well there. This type of business is interesting to me because a lot of businesses rely on intangibles, the weather and things that come up. If your business is relying on the Montreal Canadiens' performance, you may have had a pretty bad few years.
And it's really the article is specifically about the Habs and if they're doing really crappy, are you a restaurant, are you a sports merchandise company, are you within a few blocks of the Bell Center, that business is just not as good as it used to be, certainly not in years that they did well. But really the gist of the discussion, the gist that I want to make is that you shouldn't necessarily always rely on aspects that are outside your control. If your business model relies on the weather, relies on sports teams doing well, relies on the mood of your spouse on any given day, things that are outside of your control, if you can't find some aspect that is within your control, then you are basically rolling the dice, and you better have a lot of money to go. And you might as well go gamble somewhere, go take it to the ponies, because it really could hit or miss, feast or famine. So, but if you do have something that is relying on something outside of your control, find the items that you can control. If you're a restaurant, you can't control what the Habs are doing well if you're going to increase business, but you can control your food. You can control your service. You can control what other sports might be attractive, or what other things on the television might be attractive that can bring people into the door. So really the moral of this story is you rely on factors that are outside your control. You might as well go to the casino, take the dice, and roll them.
So if you were talking to a business owner who was reliant on the Habs, for example, to fill up their spot, what would you say to them? Would you say, maybe diversify, maybe get into, I don't know, stand-up comedy or chicken wings?
I think it depends on the type of business. If you're a restaurant, I would say make sure your food is top-notch, as top as you can make it. Make sure your service is excellent. Make sure if you're going to have screens to broadcast the game and they're not doing so well, turn the screens into something else, or have something else on that will attract a different. Maybe you'll have a great curling match that will bring Andrew Carter, because it's his love of life. So find something there. If you are a merchandise, if you're selling sports merchandise, well, then maybe you carry other lines of items, or you carry other aspects that could fill your store and bring it in. Maybe you have, take a page from your book, Dan. Maybe you do a campaign that says, that talks about, well, Canadians are doing so great, but these are great teams, or come see us for these rivals, or what have you. Because you still have, even though the Habs might not be doing well, they still sell out all the time. And when visiting team comes, the visitors do come. So if you want to sell merchandise that's maybe the visiting team, because that's what's going to attract it, maybe that's a better play. Who knows in any given circumstance, but don't always rely on that one thing.
One bar that did well in that respect, I recall, was Chez Serge, who became, the official bar for PK Subban, and they had this Nashville theme on the outside of their bar. That's that kind of example.
The article, this article that talks about sports merchandise, Sports Crescent, was selling better the PK Subban Nashville Predator jerseys than other Habs items. So absolutely diversify smartly, but yeah, diversify.
All right, we'll save this one for next week. 3 questions you need to ask before starting a business. That's an interesting one. We'll put a pin in that, and we'll get to Sandra Riche of the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression coming up next on Today's Entrepreneur.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Welcome back to Today's Entrepreneur, inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and FL Montreal's Josh Miller with you. And this evening, we're going to have a chat with Sandra Riche. She is with the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression. Welcome back to CJD, Sandra.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, the name of your business is pretty self-explanatory, but what is the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression?
Well, it's really a clinic specializing in anxiety and depression. Even when I came up with the idea of naming the clinic, I really wanted to make it clear what we deal with, because when you have anxiety or depression, you need a specialist. Funny thing is, a lot of people thought no one would walk in the door, and actually, people know what they're going into when they come into the center because of the name.
Did you ever get anybody asking you, hey, can you just shorten the name? We just
Yes.
need an acronym.
Yes.
It's just easier that way.
Well, writing checks is a bit of a problem, right? It's a long, long name. So, yeah, we got a lot of flack at the beginning. We do actually refer to the company often as the MCAD. So that works for people. But again, it's really worked to people's advantage that if you have anxiety, you want to know you're going to a place that treats anxiety and depression. And they are flip sides of the same thing.
Now, how long ago did this start?
Really, the company started about 11 years ago. We opened, really brought everything together into a main office 7 years ago.
And where did this start? Were you a therapist before? Like, how did this idea come about? What is your background?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting background. I was a therapist before, and even before that, while I was in school, I was bartending. So
The first natural psychologist is
Yeah.
bartender.
My real degree, I really say, came from those bartending years. I started as a part-time job, and to my surprise, I ended up bartending for close to 22 years, like almost my entire adult life. So that was a real education from a girl from Laval. I learned a lot there. I went back to school and became a therapist, and I went into private practice. I did have a family member suffering from anxiety, so I was very interested in that area.
Is that why you chose that specialty or that avenue?
Unconsciously, possibly. Consciously, no. I met the people I trained with who impressed me, happened to be specialists in that area. And also, I was very interested in the area of psychology where people are directive, not just listening and going, I'm sorry to hear you're feeling that way. That is where I was drawn. And that field is called cognitive behavioral therapy, and it happens to be the treatment of choice for anxiety and depression. So it all just came together.
So going back over a decade ago, this is before the Bell Let's Talk campaign, before we were having national conversations about anxiety in particular. What did you see at the time? Did you see that in the next few years we would be talking more openly about anxiety? Because I didn't even know really what the word meant a decade ago.
Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. I don't know that I saw it, but I did know that it was all over the place. Everybody had a family member or a friend who was suffering from anxiety, and there was far too much stigma considering everyone was going through it. So in my private practice, I started treating it using these modalities and using a bunch of modalities, because in psychology, you tend to learn one modality, and I didn't believe in that. So I used a bunch of them, and it started to be quite magical. People started getting better, and that's where the idea of the center came to be.
Now, the center, that means that there's a number of psychologists. You
Yes.
work with a team around you. How many are you today?
We are 11 now. Very proud to say that.
Was it hard to find people?
The hardest part of the whole business. I started with four people originally, and I'm happy to say they're still with me. That wasn't too bad. But since then, finding people in this field who are really good at what they do is not as easy as it sounds. And also, you got to walk the walk if you're in the field of psychology. You can't just give advice. You have to actually follow it yourself. Not everyone does that.
As a psychologist, is there parts of it that it's innate? Are you born that way? Like, is it a learned ability? Like, what do you think?
That's a great question, actually. I think great therapists, psychotherapists, psychologists, social workers, counselors are born, not made. So that's why I like your question. But I think it's an ongoing thing. You have to have a good instinct about people. But for sure, you have to be comfortable looking at your own stuff, too, because we all have stuff. And therapists are not above that, by no means.
And there's no question that you are a team. It's one thing, working alone as a therapist, and we were talking a little off air, can be exhausting or is exhausting.
Yeah.
Working as a
Isolating.
team, how does that help? How does that working as a team together help that business, that center, ultimately the patient?
Well, it's huge. So like you said, it's very isolating to be a therapist. As a matter of fact, it's very researched that therapists tend to burn out very quickly because they at the end of the day, there's a sense that you're alone and you've given out so much to your client. So I wanted to build a team that was supportive of each other. So to come to your question, we look out for each other, and we also do a lot of case conferencing. We discuss difficult cases. Sometimes we even, humor is involved just to diffuse some of the stress of dealing with difficult situations. We do get some very difficult situations.
So human resource, I mean, what's your take on human resources on your team building? How do you keep everybody kind of the same page with the right culture, with the right attitude all the time?
We meet. We have meetings called rounds where we do a lot of psychoeducation, and during that time, there's also a psychological part of like connecting the team together and to make sure we're on the same page, because there are protocols as well in the business as well as in the psychological aspect, and keeping a warm environment, which was really part of my vision. I really wanted to create a family, and we really are a family.
Now you've grown over time. You are now, like you say, 11 therapists. At what point do you decide to add a therapist? Is it because you know that there's demand out there? Obviously, we see with the Bell Talk, as Dan said earlier. Some people aren't necessarily aware, but do you field of dreams, build it, they will come, or do you what was your take on that?
It's so funny you say that, because build it, they will come is pretty much how the whole business has worked from the beginning. So I think it's a little bit like what you guys were talking about the Canadians and not relying solely on one. It's the same thing with a therapist. I didn't want to rely on just one or two therapists. So I want to have what makes me choose someone else is I want to feel that there's enough different types of personality, because matching a client with a therapist is a little bit like blind dating. It really is, because you meet a therapist, she or he may not be your cup of tea. So having different personalities and different specialties.
And do you train them, or do they come and trained?
No, I definitely train them. And that comes back to your other question, is making sure we're all on the same page. Is a big part of the business is being very ethical, being very, very professional and honorable, which is, those things come up a lot in psychotherapy. Are you going to do the right thing? Because there's a lot of murky areas.
No doubt. Psychology, it's dealing with your clients that need your help, and there's even more on the team side and human resources, and I'm sure we'll explore that further shortly.
And later in the show, from an HR perspective, we'll talk about mental health challenges in the workplace with Micheline Maillet of FL. That is on the way, plus more with Sandra of the Montreal Centre for Anxiety and Depression. Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD 800.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Welcome back to today's Entrepreneur, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with FL Montreal's Josh Miller, and our guest this evening is Sandra of the Montreal Centre for Anxiety and Depression. In a little while, we'll speak to FL HR specialist Micheline Maillet on some of the mental health challenges that we're talking about more these days in the workplace. But for now, Sandra, let's talk about HR a little bit, about people. What are you looking for in an employee, and what kind of corporate culture have you fostered at the centre?
Well, I'm certainly looking for someone who's gone through some difficult things in their own life, because how can you relate to someone else going through difficult times if you haven't? So strangely, that is one of my questions when I interview someone. Have you been through some difficult times yourself? If they say no, not at all, it might be the end of the interview. So, and also someone who's honest about themselves and comfortable with what I like to call the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's important. Of course, you need your educational background and a strong background in ethics. As I mentioned before, there are very strict rules in psychology about ethics. What do you do if a parent calls wanting to have information on their child who's in therapy? There's strong rules about that. A lot of it, though, Dan, is gut. It's a gut feeling if the person has it or not.
So with the knowledge that you have, today, with hiring your colleagues, the therapists, would you have done anything differently over the years?
Well, I mean, I think that I was lucky in a way, because I just jumped in. I just had this idea. My private practice was going through the roof. People were getting better. So I said, okay, I'll open a center. I had no advice from anyone. I had no professionals guiding me whatsoever. And I just jumped into the pool. So, I think I would consult with someone. And I also ended up opening a whole bunch of businesses at once. And I got very overwhelmed. So I would really do it a little bit slower with getting the right people to help me. I mean, I didn't even know how to do the accounting, speaking to your fields. I didn't know anything about that. I just figured I'd open a business, it would all work out. And obviously I did hit the wall at one point.
So now you ever think of giving up?
I don't think about it anymore, but I had those moments. There were times where I felt also, I'm a very small, little, successful business with small, but I felt people were coming after me, and there was like bad vibe, and I felt like it was hurting me, and I felt like I'm not sure that I'm tough enough for this. That was my fear.
So let's switch gears a little bit. You open the center. You got to get people in the door.
Yeah.
What do you do to market yourself?
Well, a lot of it was I'm very passionate about the topic. Anxiety and depression affect everyone's lives. Even if you don't have anxiety, you certainly have stress in your life, and anxiety comes into your relationships. It comes into how you raise your kids. So the number one way I marketed things was I talk about what I'm excited about, which is there's treatment. It gets better. We can help you. So I started talking, and people started asking me to come speak places, and I went to schools. I spoke on the radio. I spoke many places, and I generally didn't say no to much. And the rest, also the name of the company helped, and my reputation as somebody who helped people with anxiety and depression helped me build it.
So you still do that today? You still kind of lecture, or you and your team, of course?
Yes. My team does a lot of it. I speak all across Canada on the treatment of anxiety and depression. Again, trying to get the word out, and this is the most important part for me, that anxiety always gets better with treatment and almost always gets worse without. So people don't have to suffer. That's important to me.
So, you've heard of this Dr. Google, right?
Oh, yeah.
You heard of people self-diagnosing or
Yeah.
self-treating. How often do you see it? How do you handle that?
Well, we see it all the time, and people say, well, we've tried all the things on Google and they're not working. And we just take a breath with them, and we say that, like I said with my business, I could have benefited from a specialist. We're here to be your specialist and guide you through this, because anxiety is uncomfortable but not dangerous, and we're going to show you how you can overcome this.
Now, so when you're competing against Dr. Google, who is free,
Yes.
but you do charge for your service, that
We
is
do.
far more personalized.
Yes.
And of course, people, will definitely get something out of it. How did you determine your pricing model, either the beginning or today? Was that difficult? Do you look at the competitors? You look at what you're offering?
Another great question. I had a vision of the kind of service that we wanted to give. And I didn't know of anyone giving that service. So I did not look at my competitors. I wanted, and I still want, every client to come in and never walk out and say, that wasn't worth every dime. So our prices are not low. I mean, we have many different prices, and we have a reduced rate for people who can't afford our higher rates. But I wanted to be sure that they're going to get a very comprehensive service and someone who really cares who's going to help them through it. So that's how I did it. I built the service, and the rest just sort of followed, because it was very different than what was out on the market.
So you're really not looking at your competitors. You're building your own.
I'm really not looking at my competitors, and I really think that that's the way to go. That's my view. I mean, I'm aware of them, but...
Understood. And of course, now it all also flows or follows reputation.
Yes.
And reputation in any industry and any professional practice is key, but certainly in a psychology field, when you're dealing with clients suffering from mental health problems, reputation is huge. How do you manage it?
You cross your T's and dot your I's. I really am a strong believer. I talk about it to clients. I talk about it on the radio. I talk about it here. I'm being honorable. Mean what you say and say what you mean. And that's your reputation. When I say something, I'm going to keep to it. And I've trained my staff to do the same. So your reputation can be destroyed in 20 seconds. So we really, really all operate on that position, to mean what you say and say what you mean.
In a couple of minutes, we're going to talk more about anxiety in the workplace with our HR specialist. How common is this becoming? Do you see this a lot, sort of workplace dilemmas causing people great stress?
Yeah. It's actually, I don't know if it's the wave of now or the wave of the future, but maybe because we're all working so much and there's so much, again, technology, which we love technology, but technology is highly linked with anxiety. We're seeing a huge increase in the workplace, and we're going in a lot of times to teach people how to reduce their stress.
Now, speaking of working so much, a few moments ago, you said, it's not just one business, it's not just one center, but there are several businesses that you kind of started and there were offshoots. Tell us a little bit how that happened, but more importantly, how in the world do you balance it?
Well, balance is, I think, for every entrepreneur, the biggest challenge. It happens that the first one was that I was treating a lot of women and they were falling into the same traps over and over again. So I built a company called Empowered Women Workshops, and we do retreats twice a year. Then anxiety in the workplace and anxiety for people who weren't able to come in for treatment, we decided to do a video series called Anxiety Videos. And then my specialty is couples. And so we started doing couple retreats. The balance comes from those are not day-to-day operations, and I've had to take a little bit of a step back and make sure that I'm not getting overwhelmed by it. So there's not a retreat every week. So, and that way we can do it. I also have a radio show that allows people to stay in contact with me.
So you've learned to adjust, not necessarily cut back, but be smarter with your time.
Yeah, that's it exactly. I mean, the truth be told is until I cut back, I was on the highway to anxiety myself, no doubt. Anyone can be if you lose balance.
No question. Thank you. There's so much more to talk about, but we've learned so much about you, Sandra, and the Montreal Centre for Anxiety and Depression. Thank you very much.
Coming up next, some tips specifically for the workplace from human resources specialist Micheline Maillet on those mental health challenges at work. That is on the way.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult FL Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and FL Montreal's Josh Miller with you for today's Entrepreneur. And this evening, we're chatting with Sandra Riche of the Montreal Centre for Anxiety and Depression. She has her one piece of advice for today's Entrepreneur on the way. And let's bring in FL Human Resources Specialist Micheline Maillet on some of those challenges we're discussing on mental health in the workplace. Welcome back, Micheline.
Hi, Dan.
So, Josh, huge issue now that we're talking about more and more in the media lately, and work stresses people out.
Work stresses people out. Technology, certainly in a fast-paced environment, business environment all the time. And I guess Micheline and Sandra's here as well. So you guys, I'm sure, will have your competing thoughts or your really, really concurrent thoughts. And that is, what should entrepreneurs, what should employers really think about? How can they plan? How can they prepare? How can they handle or help their team with some mental health, anxiety, and depression issues?
It's funny because it's not something that employers were talking about at all before, but I think the awareness around the issue is great. So you can really see an increased awareness. It's really something people are talking about a lot today. And it is, there are factors in the workplace that obviously don't help, people are very different. So you could have two people in exactly the same work environment that will react very differently to it. But there are things that employers can do for sure. A lot of it's around the support. Of course, there's a stigma that's attached to it. So just in, the everyday kind of dialogue that's going on in the office, if people see that, the company's closed or there's a culture around not accepting people who can't meet deadlines or work the hours or respond all the time very quickly, then right away you're not really creating an environment, that's going to help. So a lot of it's around the culture of the organization, the training and coaching the managers have.
I think that's important because it's managers that are managing people that not everybody is equipped to handle, mentally equipped to handle some of these situations. So it's not only about the employer being open to handling it, it's also about training the managers how to really deal with it.
Yeah, 100%. So, you want to encourage people to show empathy, to be there to support the employees. So when an employee is going through something that's difficult, they're going to hopefully they'll feel more comfortable speaking to the manager who they know is open, to discuss. Also somebody who's proactive. So one thing, I see a lot is people who go on a leave of absence after there's been a conflict in the workplace that was unresolved. So sometimes if employers let things go, a poor work environment, a bad climate, harassment situations, that's obviously something that can definitely lead to, leaves for mental illness.
Sandra, you see this all the time. You certainly give guidance and coach some entrepreneurs, some employers. Are there certain, tell signs? Are there certain things that employers could look out for, little things that maybe you can enlighten?
No doubt. Changes in behavior, suddenly avoidance of things, showing up late to work, being distracted, maybe even more irritable. having an emotional response or no emotional response. And these are things that you'd really have to keep an eye on. And like you said, the manager or the person in charge needs to have the training to know what to do in those situations.
Now, there's also, they could be gone. What about coming back from a sick leave, and how to, what can be done in those instances?
It's delicate because obviously, when somebody's been on a medical leave for whatever the reason, it is confidential. So the diagnosis, everything, like whatever the reason for the leave was. So obviously, if the person's coming back, ideally from a progressive return. So, employers that will allow an employee to come back progressively to their job, they're already creating winning conditions. But it's also to make sure that the manager's aware of, without necessarily getting into details of everything, but are there any limitations when they're coming back to work? How can the manager support them, setting expectations also around the integration of the employee back into the work team. So sometimes it can be awkward just from the work team that they're coming back to. They know the person was gone. Everybody probably knows, kind of why they were off. But helping prepare the team as far as what is the person's role going to be, how many days are they coming back, what's going to be expected, how the other members of the team can help involve them in projects and that type of thing. So the whole preparation, without necessarily breaching, confidentiality, will help the person come back to an environment that's accepting.
Sandra, do you believe that an office environment should be open and transparent? Should it be totally based on the employee and say, it's up to you whether we talk about it or not, or let people know? What's been your experience?
I definitely think we have to talk to the employee about that and see what their comfort level is, because if we're open and transparent and you're not comfortable with it, that could, set someone way back. So that's a conversation we start with is the person comfortable discussing what's happened to them or not? And this can be done very slowly and transitionally.
And then there's the leaders of any company. If they're open about it, if they maybe have some mental health issues, I would imagine it's probably great to lead by example.
Yeah, 100%. It's like what Sandra was saying before, even when she's recruiting for therapists, if you've lived through something yourself, then and you share that fact, then obviously it makes it easier for an employee to go to their boss with something when they know that, their life hasn't been always perfect either. So definitely showing that, the human aspect, I guess, of the workplace is super important.
It changes the entire work environment if people talk about the fact that we all have challenges and we all face mental health issues time to time in our lives. So creating an environment like that is creating a safe environment. You're definitely going to get a good result from your employees, and they're more likely to be able to talk about their challenges, more likely to stay well.
Very quickly, one-word answer. Do you find that people with mental health issues are self-aware or not? Or can't be a one-word answer.
A lot of them are. A lot of them are. Not all of them are. A lot of them are. A lot of them don't know what to do about it. What is your thought?
If they're self-aware, well, sometimes... I guess it would just take a while sometimes for them to even know, what's wrong. So sometimes they might see a change in their own behavior and everything without necessarily knowing the reason.
It's probably just not knowing what to do with it. Well, thanks very much. I know we can chat about this topic for a long time. But as we approach the last moment of the show, as we do each week, I'll turn to you, Sandra Riche of the Montreal Centre for Anxiety and Depression, MCAD, and ask you, Sandra, what would be your one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur?
Well, my one piece of advice is, first of all, to stay true to your vision, what you start your company with. Make sure you're staying with it as you go along, and also put yourself in the shoes of the client, your employees, your entire team. Look at it from their point of view as well, and come back to your vision.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
And thanks to Sandra Riche of the Montreal Centre for Anxiety and Depression, and as well to Micheline Maillet, HR consultant at FL. And next week on the program, Josh, I guess we're moving from issues on the inside to issues on the outside.
That's right. We have two doctors on the show next week that went from public to private practice. That should be interesting to hear about their jump.
Dr. Monk and Dr. Steinberg on today's Entrepreneur next week. Don't forget you can check out past episodes, over 9 years worth of profiles at flmontreal.com. Just click on the community section there, and we'll see you next week. Have a good night.